myself out.
I am afraid of.
I'm terrified and paralyzed by.
I am deathly afraid of.
Welcome to the Sum of All Fears podcast with your host, me, Ryan Perrio. Hello and welcome to the Sum of All Fears podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Perrio. This week, my guest is wellness coach Leslie Bosch. Leslie is a wellness coach out of the Tucson, Arizona area. In this episode, we talk about wellness, and then we get into her fear of bad advice. I think that's a fantastic episode, especially for me as someone that's a comic. So let's get into that episode right now with Leslie Bosch. All right, my guest is Leslie Bosch, PhD, National Certified Health and Wellness Coach. She's based out of the Arizona area. Are you closer to Tucson or are you closer to Tempe?
Tucson.
Okay.
Closer to Tucson, yeah.
So have you always lived in Tucson? Has that just been home base?
I've been here for about 15 years. I actually started in Colorado, and then I moved to New York City, and I lived there for about 10 years. And then I moved here to go to school.
So what was it like moving from New York City to Tucson, Arizona?
It was pretty much a big culture shock, but I don't know that it was any worse than moving from Denver to New York City. That was some serious culture shock.
Yeah, because it feels like you just went from not very busy kind of then to extremely fast-paced, 24 hours, always on, and then back to we're not 24 hours here in Tucson.
No.
The food is
not at all.
amazing there though too. Like it's just it's so interesting, like all the border states, because I'm in Texas, and so there's Mexican food here, but they call it Tex-Mex because it's a lot of influence of Texas barbecue and things like that. So it's more grilled meat than I would say Arizona barbecue, which is more traditional Mexican food, where it's a lot of slow cook and not as much like grilled meat.
I would agree. I think I prefer the traditional Mexican probably to the more barbecue type that you're having there, the Tex-Mex.
Mm-hmm. I have some people that are from Tucson area, and they say the same thing. Like they can't do Tex-Mex. Like it's not, to them, that is not Mexican food.
That's right.
So you're a health and wellness coach. How did you discover that health and wellness coaching is what you wanted to do?
Well, actually, after I finished my PhD in family studies and human development, I was really sort of looking to find a job in student services at the university. And I really looked long and hard for that, but I had a difficult time. I really couldn't land a job. So I really started to wonder, what else can I do with this knowledge base? Because it's, human development and family studies, it's very practical knowledge. And I really wanted to be able to share it with people. I really wanted to be able to make a difference in their lives. So I started to think, well, maybe coaching would be a way to go. So I started looking around at coaching schools, and that's when I found Andrew Weil's program. And that's when I got into that. And that's really where I learned about health and wellness.
Okay. So how do you define health? Like, because I come from your studies and stuff, it's very interesting that you definitely deal with helping people kind of take in what they're doing, scale back their emotions, and just kind of, to not be so overcome with, I guess, either failure or setbacks or all of that stuff. It's such a nice place of health and wellness. Instead of saying, hey, let's just talk about the good side, let's talk about how we can kind of mitigate the bad feelings that come absolutely every single day of our lives, and ways we can kind of shield ourselves a little bit and not take such a hard hit.
Yes, absolutely. That's so well said. Basically, from an integrative approach to health and wellness, they really look kind of at that holistic thing. So most people, when they think of health and wellness, they're thinking of diet and nutrition. But an integrative approach looks at the interdependence, basically, of 7 core areas. So we definitely have sleep added to, we definitely have nutrition and movement, but we also add sleep. And then the part that you're sort of talking, that you're referencing is resilience, which is really about how do you manage difficult emotions, difficult setbacks, challenges that we face day in and day out. And then also has a spiritual component, which is really about purpose and having a real clear sense of who you are, where you're coming from, where you're going, and a sense of your values and a sense of whether or not you're really sort of living your values. So that can be a really huge part of health and wellness that people don't tend to think of. And then the final part is, of course, relationships. And then the last area is environment.
Okay. That's fascinating. Like the resilience part, like I don't think a lot is covered. I feel like resilience is the reason you go to a therapist or a wellness coach, is that's the driving force of, because of all the challenges you're facing and how either you feel unable to or overwhelmed by them, that's why you seek out therapy. That it's such a neat thing to hear that people coach to that. Like they just say, hey, don't, because so many people in life just, you come from a generation that said you don't share that, you just suck it up and move on.
Oh yeah. And yeah, that is so true what you're saying, because that for me was like really shocking. Like actually when I was in the program, there were a lot of things that I learned. I was not taking very good care of myself. I really didn't understand what it meant to try to be healthy, right? Mm-hmm. And to try and take good care of myself. And this is exactly one of the things you're saying. Like I had no idea that stress management was a thing. I had no idea that stress was a thing. I had no idea the negative effects of stress that is mismanaged. And so for me, that was really why I wanted to go out and really help people to deal with this. A lot of times we think in terms of mental health, but we don't really think in terms of emotional health. And this is kind of what resilience is. It's a kind of emotional health, which is akin to mental health, but it's slightly different.
Yeah. I also like the spiritual component, because a lot of times depression and being overwhelmed is not feeling like you have a purpose. And sometimes you feel like you don't know what you don't have a path. And it's amazing for me, what I've just learned from just working things out on my own is like, it's amazing how a menial task will basically put me at ease. Like just doing something that's rhythmic, like cutting vegetables, something that, you have a beginning of an end, but there's just a constant, you have to focus, you have to do this. Okay, chop, 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 move, chop, 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 move over. And it just was one of those things where I realized that it's a fight or flight mechanism that is my negative emotions, is because deep down we're all pack animals. We're still a community environment. And if your brain or your simple, I don't know what they call the base of emotions, doesn't feel like you're part of a community, it'll say, hey, you're in danger. And that's the negative thoughts that you feel a lot of times when you're alone and you're just sitting and you're depressed, or it's a survival instinct. And it was just fascinating to me that that's still so strong, ingrained in our mind, even though we have so many advancements and with social media and everything, and now the ability to voice frustrations and things, and to find, maybe not a physical community, but a virtual community of people that feel the same frustrations, whether they're yours and yours alone. But to be able to share those on a public medium, where the generation that raised me was very much like, you don't need to tell them those things. You talk to me about that, or we can, just have a one-on-one discussion. But it was very privatized. It was very much, you didn't want your neighbors to know that we were fighting, or if something like that. But now it seems like on social media, you're almost, I guess, glorified in some influencers, that by bearing your soul like that.
Yeah, you brought up so many good things. Yes, absolutely. I do think vulnerability, in the past, I think vulnerability was much more stigmatized. Now it's much more okay to manifest your vulnerability, which is really basically to say the things in your life that aren't working rather than always talking about or focusing on the things in your life or projecting, like, the things
Yeah.
in your life that are working. So it is important to have some place to go where somebody that you trust, can actually hear about what's not working for you and help you puzzle through how to get some traction on that. And that's one of the things that coaching can help people with.
How do you think social media, like how do y'all feel like this? Should there be more of a balance with that, do you think? Because I think sometimes people, just scream, to the masses, and it's some of it is some people only share, like when we grew up, only share the positive. I feel some people only share the negative. Like there are some people that just almost feel like they manufacture negativity to try to get, I guess, a response from social media or their friend groups. And I wonder how, I just don't know how that, I just don't know where that, because maybe it's just my age. I can't grasp that concept.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. When we think about negativity or drama sells, right?
Yeah.
People that are drawn to more of that. So I do think that actually digital, when you're talking about, there's actually a whole new part of coaching that's coming into being around digital well-being. And a lot of people are actually, digital social media can really make you feel lousy too, because there's a lot of that comparison piece. If you're comparing yourself to somebody who seems to have it better than you, this really can drive some of those negative feelings as well.
Yeah. There's like comparison, then there's, you read something of somebody else says and you feel the outrage. Because some people, I'm lucky that I can somewhat manage my emotions. Like I'm on some sort of spectrum somewhere where I don't think I am as impactful emotionally as other people, but other people I know and care about, they're like, they can't turn it off. Like they're, 30 minutes after you tell them something, they're still, like, I don't understand why they would do that. It's that out, they're still angry about it. And they try to help they try to help that situation. How can I help them? And I don't know how do you find the balance in that too, of just digitally, which.
Well, and that is another thing, like, with social media, as that they are sort of, psychologists are finding that we really are not meant to have so much access to so much negativity. It's kind of like a compassion fatigue. Like we feel kind of, again, powerless in the face of so much of it because there's so little that we can do about it, actually. So this can also drive a lot of feelings of helplessness. It can drive, people can get stuck in that sense of helplessness, or even, as you're saying, in a sense of outrage or sadness, because they don't have your emotions are meant to energize you to take action. But a lot of times we really can't take action on some of these larger issues in the world. So a lot of times this can bring, again, additional feelings of distress. It can be stressful.
So how you talk about self-compassion a lot, and kind of explain a little bit what self-compassion is.
Well, self-compassion really, in short, is really just being kind to yourself in the same way that you would be kind to somebody else, a friend, especially if they were having a difficult time, if they were they had failed, or they had especially noticed something that they don't like about themselves. And I don't know about you, but this is a real source of distress for me when I notice, I don't like that about myself. I wish I wasn't like that. And what am I going to do about that? So the point is that that's the essence of it.
Yeah. I struggle with that a lot, and I would say in my teenage years. I feel like I was my teens through up until around my 30s, I feel like I was I didn't understand what was wrong with me. So I would basically, my response to myself was very, I would say, negative and self-deprecating, and just basically just feeling like I didn't belong. And so I totally, I wish I had more of that at that time, but you're surrounded by so much, I guess, other input that you don't value your own. Like I think school bullying and stuff for me really eliminated my ability for self-compassion, because I believed, eventually I just believed what was being said about me. And so that, I think that is also like when I worry with kids today, and like we were talking about with social media, I got it in my 20s and 30s, so I can't imagine somebody 10 or 11, or 12 that are getting ready to start creating social media accounts. And that, to me, is terrifying too, to have a child or something that still doesn't have the ability to, I would say, be able to stand up on their own and play to their own strengths. Or it's hard. I don't know if that's even taught in schools. Like, how do you help them with their identities? Because you're just putting them in a room and letting them climb their own social ladder for 12 years. That's just that world, and just letting them kind of figure it out. And then only when you see certain triggers or something like that do we take action. But I was like, there's got to be a way to help people with acceptance, in that age too, just to tune out the noise of 30, 300 other students, depending on where you're at,
Yeah, and that is the biggest thing. Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about belonging. Belonging is huge. And if you feel that you're being excluded in a meaningful way from the, like you mentioned, the herd, or from the class, or from the clique of students that you really want to belong to, then this is very stressful. It will absolutely create that stress response. And it's very, human beings are not meant to be shunned or to be excluded. They're meant to belong and to be part of the community. So this is another part of self-compassion, because self-compassion helps you to remember that you're a human being like all human beings, and like all human beings, you have strengths and weaknesses. And sort of it's your job, you mentioned acceptance, really to come to understand what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and to sort of accept that about yourself. And to a certain extent, you can decide to play to your strengths, or you can decide to shore up your weaknesses. But a lot of this sort of depends on what you want to do with your life and how well your portfolio, as it were, of strengths and weaknesses lines up with what's required for that thing that you want to do in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just wish that was something that I would say that you started to teach like in the 4th or 5th grade, right? Because I feel like middle school is when social dynamics start to take on, and all those kids crave the acceptance of, I guess, one elite group, and I don't know how that elite group gets established. To me, I'm really curious of how the high school elite become the high school elite. Like, is it just being good at sports? Is there, what is the criteria that those kids, I guess, were just genetically embedded with, to be able to navigate social. And maybe, in my head, they had no problems, but in their mind, they had tons of problems. Like, I keep thinking of Empire Records whenever I think of, people dynamics, because, you have the beauty queen, you had all these different classes of people in one record store. And it was kind of shedding light of, you think everything's perfect. It's not. Everybody has their own struggles, but again, I think the balance of scales between online and what you don't tell people and things like that, it feels like it's so skewed. Like instead of using it to maybe communicate with people you care about, to say, hey, I'm feeling negative, you just blast, 40 YouTube clips or Instagram reels or whatever you want to use of saying I'm positive.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's really important to understand about negative emotions. Negative emotions serve basically to signal that something that's important to you is being threatened. So typically when we feel angry, we have like a goal that's being blocked. If we feel that there is some injustice and we get angry. If we feel sad, we've usually lost something, or there's the sense that we will lose, or something that's really important, or a person that's really important. So a lot of times fear, of course, is just the threat that something harm will come to us, whether or not that's, again, that it's that we will be cut out of the group and that this will bring about really bad ends for us. And you're so right that, we've only been living in modern societies for a very short time, but we've been living sort of in these small communities where we really were dependent on the community for like eons, if you believe in evolution, right? So the point is that part of us is like really, really old, and it is not going to change overnight just because we've had, modern civilization for 100 years.
It is, you're blowing my mind with just all kinds of little, like, just things I think about, like, oh my gosh. And, I never thought of it that way. And I don't have kids. And so some of this stuff is like, when I think about, like, I don't think about it in the generation behind me because I don't have any responsibilities for those, but, but I'm just in awe of like all the things that they have to navigate. Even when I was a kid, all the things I tried to navigate and did not navigate very well, and I was an only child, so I didn't have any family to bounce it off. Really, I just kind of isolated, and again, that only breeds the perception of maybe they're right, maybe they know something I don't, because I can't seem to change their mind. And you try everything. You try dressing better. You try to be a nuisance in class. You try to get attention, and it just none of it seems to work. And in 2017, I kind of found some things out about myself that helped me kind of accept who I was, and it's made my last 5 or 6 years of life just a really really nice time to be able to have that burden lifted of, is there something wrong with me? What could it be? And to just embrace who I am. And comedies help with that too, because you make jokes about embracing things that are times in your life that were challenging, and sharing that to a bunch of people that, can have a laugh about it. And so that's kind of been therapeutic in its own way. I don't know if you want to add that to your...
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That is such a great thing, because ultimately, when we can sort of understand the method behind our madness, quote unquote, I find that a lot of people do feel much better about what's going on, and they can stop saying there's something wrong with me, and they can just understand and embrace that it's their humanity and that there's nothing wrong with them. And then they can begin to look back on the real challenge is to begin to look back on your story, the curses, right? And try to find the blessings that come out of those curses as well. Curses, seeming in your hardship. Yeah. Your hardship seems like a curse, and that you will forever be cursed, and you can never have sort of, as it were, right, the kiss of true love, right? That sort of lifts the spell, breaks the spell. And you really are able to embrace, your beauty within, or just your unique version of a human being.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too where you have to learn self-compassion, because if you don't love yourself, how do you expect someone else? They're not going to want to try to convince you differently over and over again. They're going to have a set period of how many times they're going to tell you a certain thing, and after that, they just can't do that on the daily. They have their own things, and that's one of the things that I learned later on. Like I found somebody now that I'm seeing, but it was like that was a revelation to me. It's like, they're not, why am I putting the burden of them having to convince me to love myself? I should do the work to find out, why I don't love myself and fix those problems. Like show up that weakness as you point out, like it's a weakness that, and then, then bring someone else into the fold, because you don't want to bring someone into the fold in that period of time because they think you're great. They don't want you to, to sit there and just constantly, hear how negatively you think about yourself.
Yeah. They want to love you and they want you. This is a thing called negative identity, and people can get trapped in a negative identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be very challenging to break out of that and get into a positive identity. So this is also something that a coach can help people with. But yes, it is because as human beings, we want to confirm our identities. We want to verify them. So usually why it's problematic to have a negative identity is then you go out and engage in behavior that confirms that you're right. You're a bad person, right? Whereas other people go out and they do things and sort of that confirms, look, yeah, I'm a good person, right? I'm lovable. I'm likable. I'm trustworthy. I'm worthy of love and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a really good thing that you sort of looked at that and began to turn that negative identity into a positive identity, or at least a balanced identity.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's something you just don't realize it, because once you kind of find those things, you can kind of move away from that. And you don't again, like you said, dwell on it or let it occupy your mind. And so it's definitely something I feel like a lot of, like when I watch comics, you learn kind of how to do it, because you're always trying to find things to write about, and you start writing about things that that maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing, but as you share them, you slowly get more and more comfortable with sharing it, and which tells me that you're more and more comfortable with the situation that happened.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And that is a great measure of how much you've healed or how much you've transformed your attitude, because it's really about an attitude towards something. And attitudes are just basically, do I like this or do I hate this? It's a dislike, right?
Yeah.
So like, dislike. So we want to be able to just sort of get neutral. I can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
Or I really like it or I really don't like it.
So as a wellness coach, what do you think are the biggest challenges for you? Like which of the 7, I guess, factors that you go by to help mental health and wellness, which ones do you find are the most overlooked?
Oh, definitely. I feel like people languish inside of resilience. Absolutely. And I think sometimes they languish inside of the spirituality piece.
Mm-hmm.
But stress will manifest in people's life like they can't sleep at night. So this is a big one I get a lot, that people are struggling to sleep. They're struggling to feel rested. Another way stress really manifests, it's not overlooked, but where it becomes problematic is when people are sort of stress eating a lot of junk food and putting on weight, or drinking too much and gaining weight. But mostly I think people are just not aware that they can manage their feelings, that they can decide how they're going to feel about situations, and helping them to figure out how to do that.
Yeah. You also talk about like helping people overcome the overwhelm.
Yes. And self-compassion can really help with overwhelm, but you can also just understand that it's not the events that actually create the overwhelm, but rather, here again, your thoughts about the events. So how you choose to evaluate the situation, whether or not it's positive or negative, this is what drives your feelings. And then your feelings drive your behavior, and then your behavior drives your results. So a lot of times people think, no, this is just a bad thing and I should just feel bad. And it's like, well, you could, but you could also feel grateful. You could feel interested. You could feel inspired. You could feel challenged. You could feel eager, right? Enthusiastic about the opportunity to be alive and to grapple with the challenge. So you could feel grateful. There's a lot of things that you could feel, as well as just angry or sad or frightened.
Interesting. And it's hard to do in the moment. Like I feel like that in the moment, it is there's so much overstimulation is, I guess, a good word for it, that you're just, there's so many things that are hitting so many different triggers that it's hard to maybe pull back and what else could this feeling be? What else could this be besides just a lot of anger?
Well, I think it's so good too. Like I forgot to mention, this is your bread and butter, but you could find it amusing. You could find some aspect of this. And I've heard comics say that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the mom was carrying on about how terrible something was. And the girl was just thinking, how is this funny? How is this funny? How is this funny?
Mm-hmm.
And eventually her brain did return an answer to how this is funny, right? So a lot of times the trick really is to, well, first of all, when you're really struck by something, the best thing to do is, like you said, take a step back and breathe deeply in an effort to try and just calm down.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're really stressed out, our mind is just not helping us. It's really sort of wanting us to attack, right? To fight, flight, or freeze,
yes.
right? So it's really important to try and get that shift, like you mentioned, from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic so that we can just get back into our best thinking. And so the first thing to do is just to take some deep breaths and try and calm down. And then you can begin to start to ask yourself some other questions that could begin to bring up some different emotions.
Definitely. Speaking of emotions, my podcast is about the emotion of fear, which you had a variety of fears, which I can imagine. One that really kind of stuck out that I struggle with too is bad advice, which I thought it's got to be, something. And I mean, I feel like sometimes, no advice to me is bad advice unless it comes from a place of negativity. Like if that this isn't the right thing to say, but you're saying it because you want to get, I guess, either justification on your own emotional standpoint. To me, that's the only bad advice, is that if you're consciously steering somebody negatively.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you're intentionally doing it, then that's really frightening. But at the same time, a lot of people gave me a lot of bad advice in my life. And it's kind of like even what you were saying, right? The bullies were actually giving you advice. It was bad advice. And you sort of bought into it for a long time before you started to say, no, I'm not following that advice anymore. So the point is, I do think sometimes people really do have answers to some questions or could give some kind words of encouragement, but they also withhold that. So I think that's also a couple of ways it can go. So for me, certainly as a coach, I'm really dedicated to giving sound, good advice to my clients and to anyone who asks me for some advice or who is near me and struggling with something. And thankfully, like I said, through all my training in my PhD program and all my training in the health and wellness space, I really do feel that most of the time I'm giving good advice because it really is grounded in science. We really do know, based on studies, best practice. Right. So usually I am pointing people toward best practice. So I feel a lot better about that. The odds of me giving bad advice has gone down dramatically, but I'm still always, and also, always on the lookout for bad advice. Like I don't want to take on bad advice either.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any examples of someone trying to, I guess, pass you bad advice, or like you don't have to name names, but?
Well, I think that a lot of it, yeah, I knew I probably should have had a few queued up, but I think mostly it's just a lot of people, again, are telling you what works for them. So you really, again, they're living their lives according to their beliefs about what's best. Right. And a lot of times especially when you're younger, most of the time I received advice then, I was given advice that worked for them, but they weren't really thinking about, well, I don't know, Leslie, tell me more about your situation. What are you trying to do? And what resources do you have? And what have you tried? And, really been interested in me and the specificity of my situation rather than just telling me what they would do from their worldview. I think this is biggest distinction, if you will.
Yeah, I struggle with that sometimes too. And again, somewhere on the spectrum I am. It's just sometimes a lot of times in my interpersonal relationships and stuff, I have to remind myself to not try to solve the issue at hand, because some of the times it's just they just want to unload and just to be like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I can't believe that. And not to immediately try to remedy or fix the ship. Sometimes people already know what they want to fix. They just want to complain about having to fix the ship.
Yes, very well said. They just basically they want, I think like the special word that I like to use is they want to be witnessed. They want to be witnessed. They want you to witness that they are in it and that all the things that they have to do in order to sort of fix it, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times people just want to be understood. They want to be witnessed, and they want to be validated that this is a big deal.
Yeah, and it's something I struggle with, and again, it can again lead to you down negative road, because then you feel terrible for trying to help, and it just becomes a sore point, and it bugs me because I never want to be that person to people I care about. I don't want to be somebody that like they don't want me to tell me anything because they feel it is something that they can't share with me, because I will either blab or I won't listen. I will just start trying to offer solution stuff. And I struggle with bad advice because sometimes people, I think, get bad advice that works, and then they hear my advice that's contrary to that, and they would rather take the bad advice that maybe shows some results quicker than as a comic. Because I mean, there are people that would you'll just believe that there's shortcuts, that there are things in my 15 years that I just know are just tips and tricks that have gotten me to my level. And there really isn't. It's just repetition. It's just like weightlifting. It's how did you get so strong? There's no, they'll have workout tips where some people say, I lift, but the key thing is they would lift, they were constantly working out and, trying to lift extra weight. They just never rested on just, once a week or twice a week. They were in the gym every other day, if not every day. And it's just hard to explain to people because everything else seems to have so many different shortcuts or paths or things that you can do. You can do weight loss. You got intermittent fasting. You've got eating right, portion control. So all these different things that can shortcut weight loss. But the key thing is that you're paying, everybody's paying attention to their diet every single day. And that's the hard thing to explain to people, is they just see the fad or the South Beach but I'm like, no, but it's also being conscious of what you're eating instead of being unconsciously eating everything that's put in front of you. There are things that happen. And so I struggle with, like always trying, did I overstep? Because to me, bad advice also is overstepping. And I don't know if you've ever felt like you've overstepped something with your client or a loved one where you've kind of offered advice that maybe they weren't ready to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's why you definitely want to lead with empathy. Always lead with empathy, because empathy is basically just demonstrating that you understand where they're coming from, and maybe asking some questions that can help them get a little clearer about what they want to do next. But primarily, you want to try and keep yourself out of it. I mean, when they come to a coach, they are looking for answers. And as a coach, you need to give it. But as a friend, as a sister, as a brother, as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, usually you have to stay out of it until they're asking you for it.
Yeah. And it's something I struggle with, because as a person I care about, I want to help lighten the burden and do all those things. But, sometimes you can help too much or try too much, and it just becomes an annoyance, or, something that they just don't really appreciate.
Yeah. And you can definitely ask the question, how can I help? How can I help? This is a great question to ask. Once you say, oh, you're upset, that makes sense. How can I help? And then they can tell you sort of what they want. Nothing. I just want you to listen to me. Okay. So you just give your time and listen. So that's another great way to help get a sense of what they need from you, what you can provide that they're looking for.
Is And so I feel like what is your greatest, I guess, coaching victory so far? Like what do you feel like has been like, you know, when you look back at coaching, what are the things that you look back on and just kind of, you know, just kind of give you that purposeful, I guess, you know, just kind of like, you know, it's a little feather in the cap, if you will, of coaching?
Well, for me, I just love seeing my clients like blossom. You know, usually when they come, they're feeling stuck, and we sort of keep poking around until we figure out what it is that's actually holding them back. And then once we address that thing that's holding them back, they really start getting traction and moving forward. I've had so many clients, especially, you know, I had a young woman who was a young therapist, and she was just really wanting to do a great job for her clients, and she just kept feeling, you know, sort of held back, pressured, self-doubt, a lot of self-doubt. And we just worked together, and eventually she really got free of those, again, a lot like what you're saying, voices in her head that were telling her certain things that she couldn't do or things that she shouldn't do. And eventually we just sort of neutralized those voices. And then she went and talked to her leadership team, and they started a new program in her nonprofit. And now she's spearheading that, and they've got like a wait list, and she's having a wonderful time really living her dream for her clients in a really full and purposeful way. So that happens quite a bit with my clients, where they feel that they are free to really pursue their dreams. And for me, this is like so much fun to be a part of that process.
That's awesome. And as a wife and mom, it's kind of, it almost probably feels like a mom too when your kid, like, you know, does something that's, you know, above and beyond, or graduation, or when they hit those milestones of achievement. Like you just kind of beam, and, you know, even though they may thank you, they may not, you know, you played a part in it, and you don't need that. Sometimes you don't need that gratitude. It's always nice to receive it, but you just kind of see the direction they're heading and stuff. So I totally see that too with like young comics and stuff, where they're starting to find opportunities and stuff, and you get that validation piece, which is, I think, the most crucial part of stand-up, is just being validated for the work you're putting in and the effort. And it just seems like that, more than monetary or anything else, drives people. And it's really nice to see, because I'm like, you know, everybody is good at something, and I've always tried to believe at that, and try to find what you're good at is something that can be a challenge. And, you know, you should try everything as you can. I wish society didn't make everything so expensive, but I feel like if there was a way, like I was talking to another person, I think a couple of weeks ago or so, we were talking about sports, and I was like, you know, I wish that they had, or, you know, for and the identity thing of being, because we were talking about his fear is not being liked. And I was like, you know, I wish they had a thing in school where you could experience all these different things, like band, sports, and not incur all the fees of having to go out for sports. Like you didn't have to buy all the equipment. Like everything was just there, so that you could try it like an almost like an adult PE or young adult PE, where you would do different roles every day. Because I think the fact that psychology is not taught very much until you get to college does a disservice to kids, because I think they'd be fascinated by knowing and having that knowledge to know why they're, you know, so that if they are feeling like you overwhelmed or something like that, they don't have to just sit in their room maybe, or, you know, not feel like they can share that with anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Leslie, I appreciate you doing this. Where can people find you on social media if they're wanting any kind of coaching or tips or any special?
Yeah, they can find me on my website at Bosch, integrativewellness.com. And you spell my name like the appliances, BOSCH. Again, that's Bosch, integrativewellness.com. And on my website, they can there's lots of free resources. They can even get a download about how to cope with overwhelm in 3 simple steps. That's awesome.
And so did your family help you, like give you a lot of reasons to help with overwhelm? Like you had to pull that 3 three-step process out.
Well, and me too. I have to use it all the time on myself because as a business owner, it's so easy to get overwhelmed. You have to do, as you well know, when you're charged with your whole career, it's like you, and you. Everything is on you, and you have to get it done. So, a lot of times it can feel very overwhelming when you're a small business owner to really do all the things that you need to do. So, I'm using the process all the time myself as well. And yeah, I do coach my husband when he needs it, but he's pretty good at managing his own overwhelm. So
well, that's amazing. I'm glad that you guys have such a great life balance and you still have fun and share experiences and things like that, and that y'all can kind of be the rock and maybe the rock that leans, that pushes you, out of your comfort zone. Because sometimes that's another thing with overwhelm too, is that you have to. It's the overwhelm of trying to push yourself. And comedy-wise, for me, it seems like to push yourself further than what you're doing now. What you're doing now maybe works kind of, but what if it worked better if you pushed yourself a little bit further? And it's so hard to get out of that safety net.
Absolutely. You're so right on when it comes to getting out of your comfort zone. And that's sort of exactly what my stress reset program helps people do. It helps them upgrade their response to stress. And then they get new permanent strategies for coping with stress that can serve them then for the rest of their life.
That's amazing. I thank you so much, Leslie, for doing this. Hope you have a great rest of the weekend.
Yes. Thank you, Ryan. It was a privilege to meet you and a great time to sit with you. And I really appreciate the opportunity. And I hope you have a great weekend too.
So that was Leslie. What a fun conversation. I love talking about mental health and stress and kind of getting away and just trying to find accountability. I loved self-compassion and things like that, and getting stuck in certain mental states and not realizing how many steps are there in like mental health and resiliency and things of that nature. It's always such a fun conversation. Check out Leslie on social media. We'll have her links in the show notes, as well as Bosch Integrated Wellness. We'll have all those links in the show notes. I just spent a weekend in the Plano House of Comedy. It's a new club with comedian Mo Mandel and Alec Parent. It was a fun time. I hosted. I hadn't done that in a while, and it was fun to know I still got it as far as an MC skills. Had a great time. Had some delicious food. Food there is amazing, so check out Plano House of Comedy if you're in the North Texas side of things. They got a great comedy club up there, and it should be a fun time. Next week, I'll be doing a private show, and then after that, I will be at Hyenas in Fort Worth, April 28th. So come check me out some point in time, and it should be a great, great weekend ahead. So thanks again for everyone for listening. I hope you're having a happy Easter. This is it's Easter Sunday, so it's a very, very holiday, and I'll get the podcast up and going here by Monday morning. Thanks again. Happy holidays to everyone, and have a great week. Thanks for listening to Some of All Fears podcast. And now some thank yous for the folks that make this show possible. Thanks to Barry Whitewater for my art and graphics. You can follow him on Instagram at bwhiteh2o. Get it? H2O like water. You can also follow him on Facebook, Music. A huge thank you to Gunnar Olsen for the wonderful music provided for this podcast. You can follow him on Instagram at gunbuns, that's GUNBUNS, as well as his website, gunnarolsen.net. Check out some of the samples that he has recorded. They're amazing. He's an amazing percussionist. If you want to follow the show, we've got a Facebook group, Some of All Fears. Instagram, Twitter, you can find us at Some Fear Fans. If you have some feedback for the show, email me at somefearfans, SOMEFEARFANS @gmail.com. I'll be happy to take those into consideration. Also, if you'd like to be a guest, email me at somefearfans@gmail.com. We can try to iron out some details and get that settled in. Give us some feedback. If on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a review. It makes the show bigger, and it's not going anywhere. I'm going to record as many shows as I possibly can. If you want to follow me on social media, I am at Ryan Perio. It's RyanPerio on all social media platforms. You can follow me there, and you can check me out at ryanperio.com, my website. I'll try to list upcoming shows there as well. It's been kind of spotty because as soon as I set it up, that's when the pandemic happened, and everything's kind of just in a holding pattern. Thanks again for listening to the Sum of All Fears podcast. Next week, we'll have another guest with another fear. Thanks for listening.